Most Walstad method aquariums, they don't crash in the first month. They usually crash after like month 6 to 12. Once you get into that window, it starts crashing. And it's not because the soil's run out of nutrients, like people will have you believe. It's because the system has fundamentally changed. This is the third part of my trilogy of soil, cap, and then deficiencies, all linked together, and I'm making them as a video series. Today I'm going to explain to you exactly what happens as a Walstad method aquarium matures, what causes this 12-month crash, and steps we can take to prevent it without tearing the whole aquarium down. In the first video, we talked about the soil, we talked about the chemistry of the Walstad method. In the second video, we talked about the cap, which is the physics of the system. This is what regulates everything and helps support all the other systems in the aquarium in the method. But there is a third layer to this system that no one ever talks about, and that is time. What happens to this system over time? A Walstad method aquarium, once it gets to 12 months, is not the same system you set up on day one. It's gone through several processes and it's now in a different stage of its life. The soil itself has changed, the cap has changed, and now the biology of the aquarium is starting to change. And if you don't understand what these changes are, your aquarium will ultimately collapse. Let's start with the soil, because this is where the collapse starts to happen in real time. Initially, the trace elements within the soil will start to decline. And the first nutrients we'll start noticing to deplete are micronutrients, stuff like iron, manganese, zinc, and boron. These are the first thing you'll notice as showing signs of depletion in the aquarium. And your plants, they won't die instantly, they'll start to show signs of starvation. Secondly, organic carbon starts to slow down. In the first 6 to 12 months, the aquarium, the soil is like breathing, it's taking in lots of oxygen, it's releasing lots of CO2, and it's regulating the system. But as the tank starts to mature and the bacteria starts slowing down and changing into different types of bacteria, this CO2 depletes forever. And it's never coming back. The CEC in the soil starts to become saturated. CEC is kind of like the soil's nutrient battery, and this is starting to give in. It's starting to stop. It's getting to the end of its life cycle. And over time, it starts locking up the wrong ions, like calcium and magnesium, and sodium. And when this happens, potassium basically just gets locked out of the equation. So the plants can't take up potassium at the roots. That's the end of potassium at the root structure. So now you've got this situation where you've got low trace elements, low potassium, and low CO2 levels. And this is the perfect ingredient for a slow decline. The cap also starts changing too. The gravel starts compacting, and the pores start filling with bits of detritus, and the oxygen can't penetrate as efficiently anymore, and any CO2 that's still there can't escape into the system. The root zone as well shifts. What used to be an aerobic zone at the top of the soil starts to lose its oxygen, so it's becoming microaerobic, or it's getting less aerobic, the area. And this in and of itself creates nutrient deficiencies. At this point, iron can become locked and unavailable to plants. Even though it's still there, it's locked away and the plants can't use it anymore. And the same with manganese, they're still there, but the plants will struggle to uptake it. They have to go through a lot of effort to start trying to unlock these things, and it's not very efficient for the plants. And as I mentioned, the gas exchange starts to slow. CO2 can't move as freely anymore, and the roots themselves can't breathe as efficiently. It's starting to get hard for them to breathe through the roots. So now the soil is milder, the cap is denser, and it makes life for the roots that little bit harder. This is exactly why Walstad method aquariums crash after 6 to 12 months. Not because the method is unstable in any way, it's one of the most stable aquarium environments you can ever create. And it's not because the soil has run out of nutrients. Some of them are locked away, some of them have become less efficient, but ultimately the nutrients are still there, a lot of them. It's just that we can't access them anymore, and at least not as efficiently. So the real reason is because the substrate has aged and now it's going through different chemical processes. So the real causes with age are trace starvation. The trace elements aren't there and the plants can't uptake them anymore. This is in the area around the roots. Imagine, there could be loads of soil in different parts of the tank, but the area around the roots, the soil, it has been depleted by the plant roots, and them nutrients, because the CEC is locked, it can't hold the nutrients there any longer. So the plant roots can't get access to the nutrients and it starts showing starvation. And then that brings me perfectly onto potassium limitation. So all the CEC, all this soil around the roots can't hold potassium anymore. So potassium is becoming deficient and the plants can't uptake it anymore. Iron availability. It's now going into a situation where iron's become locked in a way that the plant roots can't access it. It's still there, it's just unavailable to the plants. The bacteria in the root zone have stopped producing CO2. The bacteria aren't as active anymore, there isn't as much food for them. So the colonies are slowing down, and with that, the CO2 levels decrease. And as I say, the CO2 is never coming back. And as I've explained, the microbial succession, it's changed. These bacteria, like some of them, when we first set our tank up, they spread rapidly, but they're not very efficient in the long term. As the tank stabilizes, we get Commomax bacteria, which are slower to propagate, but they're more efficient at what they do. So we get chronic deficiencies. Melt and collapse ultimately if we don't address these problems. Your tank isn't really dying, it's just aging, and we have to step in and do something about it. At this stage, water changes absolutely help. They reduce the dissolved organics in the water column and they'll improve oxygen within the water. This freshens up the water column and makes it easy for plants, but they don't refresh the CEC in the soil. They're like magnets in the soil. These are locked now and they'll never be refreshed. So it won't replenish the micronutrients within the soil. It won't restore the potassium and it won't unlock the iron either. It's never going to bring back the root CO2 at the soil level, and it won't stop the tank from aging either. Water changes help massively in the water column, but they don't help fix the soil. Diana Walstad, she actually gives really clear advice on what to do with this stage of your aquarium. She recommends adding potassium, adding iron, adding other trace elements, reducing the light if needed to compensate for the slower metabolism of the plants. And yeah, she's also recommended replacing micro pockets of maybe soil or adding root tabs to where hungrier plants are to help them. Diana Walstad has never said no ferts. She said to supplement the aquarium as it ages. So for me, I've got a different take on this stage of the mature aquarium. Diana Walstad wrote a book in 1999 before a lot of this modern aquarium stuff came out, and her advice is based on that period of the time, using salts to manually buffer things and replenish things. Now for me, I've always recommended a mild, low textile liquid fertilizer. It won't cure the soil, but it helps to bypass the soil and keep the plants rolling along. And the formula of nutrients in it are very similar to what Diana Walstad was recommending to dose individually, but in this you get like a complete fertilizer, so you can dose them all at once. So the soil is still stabilizing the aquarium. The fertilizers we dose are just feeding the plants and helping them stabilize the aquarium. There's also a hack for this phase of the aquarium, and I love this hack, because some plants just don't rely on CO2 at all. They take their carbon straight out the water column and they use this instead of CO2 as their carbon source. So they don't care if there's absolutely no CO2 in the aquarium. They'll just use this and they'll just pull the carbon out of the water and carry on growing, and they won't care. My favorite species that do this include Hygrophila polysperma, Elodea densa, which is my favorite beginner plant, and Val, which is, it grows in absolute jungle, doesn't it? And then obviously floating plants, because they don't need access to CO2 in the water because they're on top of the water, so they pull the CO2 straight out of the atmosphere, so they couldn't care less if there's no CO2 in the water. If you add these to a mature Walstad method aquarium, they won't care if there's CO2 or it's depleted at all. They'll just carry on going about the business and carry on growing. So then, does the soil still matter? Well, absolutely, yeah. Even when the soil is spent of all its nutrients, it still binds ammonia, houses microbes, regulates oxygen, buffers the chemistry in the aquarium, and it's still somewhere for the roots to anchor and hold the plant in place. So in general, while it stops being a food source for the plants, it's still stabilizing the aquarium, and this creates a much more stable environment than most aquariums in the modern hobby. So these are the steps we can take. To deal with the 12-month crash or the mature phase of the aquarium after the nutrients are depleted. We can dose potassium, we can dose iron, we can dose manganese, we can dose all the trace elements. We can also reduce the light slightly, so the plant's metabolism's gone down. So we bring the light down slightly in sync with this, or also we can add floating plants. If we already haven't added floating plants, then this is a fantastic opportunity to add them, and they'll naturally shade out some of the light. Now, these are 3 pieces of advice that I don't fundamentally follow, which is adding pockets of fresh soil under the soil substrate and adding root tabs, or like lightly vacuuming the cap. These are things that I tend to kind of stay away from. I think if we disturb the water column and do water changes, it should keep pulling bits of mulm out the cap, and we're gradually disturbing and pulling out little pockets of mulm every time we do a water change. And this will help freshen up the cap. And that's it. That's the soil. We don't need to fight it. We don't need to tear our tanks down and start again. We're just in a different stage of the Walstad method, and this is all part of the Walstad method, the real Walstad method, not the viral sensation we see all over social media. So now you realise that Walstad methods tanks don't crash, they mature. But nobody talks about this, and no one explains to you what you can do about it and how to take your aquarium into the next stage of its life. In fact, most people who talk about stripping it down once the soil's depleted, but that's just the initial phase of a Walstad method aquarium. What comes after is a mature planted tank, and it can carry on going for years. So if your plants are melting or they're showing signs of deficiency, I'm going to touch on this in the next video, so please make sure to check it out. Thanks very much, guys. Take care.